The Taking was a 3-month project that investigated how the federal government used its power to take land belonging to people that lived on the Texas-Mexico border for a border fence project that began more than a decade ago. The series of articles focus on how the border wall was built using government force on landowners to sell land, and how the money from these sales didn't always go to the people that deserved it.
Seated. I'm pleased that you all are here to witness the signature of the Secure Fence Act of 2006. This bill will help protect the American people. This bill will make our borders more secure. It is an important step toward immigration reform.
In 2006, the Bush administration passed the Secure Fence Act, kickstarting the project with $1.2 billion to begin construction of a 700-mile-long fence along the U.S.-Mexico border. Although immigrant rights groups, which had mobilized massive rallies in favor of immigrant legalization, who vowed to keep up the fight to end massive deportation, provide citizenship to illegal immigrants, and promote family reunification, construction of the border fence continued in full force. Construction of the fence continued under the Obama administration. However, Obama's plan for border control focused more on the use of border patrols and deportation rather than reliance on the construction of a border fence. Funding for the project fell by hundreds of millions of dollars after its nearly $1.6 billion peak in 2008 at the beginning of the Obama administration. In 2011, on a speech about immigration policies in El Paso, Obama made the claim that the border fence was now basically complete. Although it is true that 649 of the intended 652 miles of borderland did have fencing, only 36.3 miles possessed the double fencing that was originally promised under the 2006 Secure Fence Act.
Our task then is to make our national laws actually work, to shape a system that reflects our values as a nation of laws and a nation of immigrants.
Despite this, the number of people who attempted to illegally cross the U.S.-Mexico border fell considerably. More of the deportations were individuals already living within the United States. Trump's border policy is no secret. He has been very vocal with his desire to crack down on illegal immigration recently, with his stance on DACA. Most people know of the new, larger wall Trump has been pushing for. While there has been no construction thus far, several prototypes for the intended wall have been designed. To this day, the Trump administration is still pushing for the funding necessary to build the 2,000-mile-long barrier.
The idea was formed by the three main journalists working on this project: Julian Aguilar, T. Christian Miller, and Kia Collier. They contributed different ideas and angles before landing on the idea of focusing on the land being taken through eminent domain laws to build the fence. Their main priority was finding an angle that had not yet been covered. Julian Aguilar is an immigration and border security reporter for the Texas Tribune. Aguilar worked mainly on the ground, traveling to the border to interview those impacted. Aguilar worked closely on this project with Thomas Christian Miller, a senior reporter for ProPublica. He has over 25 years of experience as a professional journalist and foreign correspondent covering 4 wars, a presidential campaign, and reporting from over 24 countries. He won the Pulitzer Prize in 2016 and 2 Emmys in 2015 to recognize his work. The Pulitzer Center offered news organizations a grant to work on specific topics, which ProPublica received and partnered with the Tribune. By interviewing people located on borderland, they learned more about the issue of eminent domain and lawsuits stemming from this issue, which formed their story. The court cases mentioned are based on eminent domain laws. When the government announces land seizure to the owner, they can either agree or fight and send it to court on the basis that the government isn't paying enough for the full value of the land. Their first step was to talk to people affected by the issue. UT Austin has an immigration law clinic that has records of emails between Homeland Security, landowners, the White House, and all parties involved in these cases. They were able to move forward to a personal perspective by talking to people living in the border area, specifically Oklahoma Avenue. Once the team split up the court cases, they talked to the landowners involved. Some landowners cooperated and gave information, and some slammed the door in the face of Julian Aguilar, who conducted the majority of the canvassing. These people are still angry about what happened and don't want to discuss it. They also don't trust reporters. Many of the citizens living on the border experience media burnout, as journalists writing about the wall have been interviewing them constantly. However, they were able to speak and build rapport with many of the landowners in the area, giving an essential personal angle to the piece. Also, from Aguilar's prior work with immigration journalism, he knew some people that had worked under George Bush and had since gone into the private sector, which helped him with his story. Human aspect, however, was only one facet of the coverage. At least half of their research was devoted to the policies and documents. Some of the documents were completely redacted by the federal government, which was a major roadblock for them. Sometimes 3/4 of a page could be blacked out, increasing the importance of interviews. Aguilar began reporting in the last few years of the Bush administration. Then he concentrated on violence in Mexico and the impact on the perception of the border. Working under 3 administrations thus far, he was able to observe many changes in policy. Bush was the last president to try and pass immigration reform in 2006 and 2007. He was relatively moderate on immigration issues. He is on record saying that immigration reform was his biggest failure. Obama, however, was tougher on immigration. His administration removed a record amount of people, more in the first 3 years than Bush did in 2 terms. Obama promised immigration reform, and when he had complete control of the Senate and House during the first term, he prioritized the Affordable Care Act instead, which upset many dreamers. Conservatives still pushed for higher border security and reflected Trump's ideas as his campaign began. Trump, when first elected, had trouble with Congress and ramped up deportations. One area that caused a dispute was simply how to move forward with the project. They debated doing a documentary piece, how to use the resources in which to use, and how many stories they wanted to produce. There was no pushback against the topic, however. The Pulitzer grant required that project idea be planned before submission, so they had to continue on the approved terms, which prevented them from looking back and changing much. A major roadblock the team ran into was not getting necessary information or being able to contact people. One of the most difficult parties to contact was the Department of Homeland Security. Miller in particular had to send them many emails and call many times to elicit any type of response. Most people did not respond to them, even with many opportunities. For Miller, another roadblock was the data reporting. It was often difficult to figure out how the government had come up with the price of land, as they did not correspond. The ways the prices were calculated for land were complicated, and the government would not explain them, so it slowed down the project. The largest surprise for Aguilar was the pushback from landowners. He had grown to expect this with criminal cases, but he did not expect people to dismiss the fact that they were trying to give a voice to their story. It spoke to the level of sensitivity that existed 10 years later, after the original wall was built and the land was taken. For Miller, the policy of eminent domain was surprising by itself, along with how the government handled it. Prices were not correct for land, and sometimes the wrong people received payment for the land. For example, tenants would receive payment instead of the landowners. The journalists both claimed that it was not difficult to stay unbiased during this project.
You know, T. Miller, he's won a Pulitzer. He's just great. I don't think there's anything that he hasn't covered that would make him lean one way or another. You know, of course, when you clock out and you're having a beer at the end of a 12-hour shift, we can talk about our own opinions, you know,
right.
But I don't think those ever bled into our copy. On my front, because I do cover immigration, you know, I've been criticized by folks like Dreamers saying, hey, we appreciate your coverage, but you're a U.S. citizen, you don't know what it's like to be like us. And I've also interviewed families of people who were hurt or even killed by people who were in the country without authorization, who are very, very upset, you know, and they get on me also. So I think just because I've covered this issue so much that I was able to keep my own opinions at bay.
Aguilar's largest takeaway was the difficult nature of working with the federal government, which was very guarded on the topic. If Aguilar could have done something differently in the project, he would have wanted to focus the subject more. Miller left the project with a new appreciation for the amount of corruption in the Rio Grande Valley area due to newspaper attraction. If he could have done something differently, he said he would include more of the individual states' policies in the paper and how their own reforms affected citizens. The impact of the article was focused on providing insight into eminent domain. The journalists wanted to publicize people's rights and expose the often hasty and corrupt process of the taking to a larger audience. For Aguilar, this project was to arm the public with information. They reached out to the partners and made sure their project was well known so that information could be spread. By reading the article, people would become better acquainted with their rights and know how to fight back if the same thing happened again. This is especially relevant for those living in Texas and on the border, but important for all citizens in the U.S. to know. The reader response Aguilar and Miller received was mostly positive. Their story will actually be used in a brief for a legal case against the Supreme Court over how the government determines land value. Miller noted how the article will have an even more important impact if Trump's new border wall is built, because the same thing may happen again. Simply due to the fact that the wall hasn't been constructed and doubtfully will be in the near future, the article didn't have as much of a national impact as they had hoped. But eminent domain is an important issue for the United States because neither Democrats or Republicans agree with it, and it may have a huge impact in the future.